The Legal Eagles here at Bullock's Rules for Writing would like to remind everyone that advanced placement is a registered trademark of the College Board, and the College Board has not approved, sanctioned, or in any way associated themselves with me or Bullock's Rules for Writing. I'm just a guy with a ridiculous number of plaid shirts, a dream, and a theme song. Hey there, and welcome back to our series on the AP English Language and Composition class. So far in this series, we've talked about the class in general, what the expectations are, what kind of a thing you would be doing in the class. We've talked a little bit about the exam in general and beating the test anxiety. We've talked about the multiple choice portion of the exam in particular. And today we're going to talk about the argument question on the exam. Now, technically, the argument question is always question 3. When you get the writing booklet and you open it and you have your 2 hours and 15 minutes to write 3 essays, read all the stuff that's in there, make sure you understand the prompts, and then write 3 essays. Question 3 is the argument question. But I like to start by teaching argument because the other 2 questions, the synthesis prompt and the analysis prompt, are kinds of argument. So if you understand how to make an argument and you understand what the important rules are for writing an argument, then you can do well on the synthesis and the analysis. That's why I like to start with argument, even though it's last in the booklet. If you have taken my AP class, if you are taking my AP class, or even if you've just perused other videos on this channel, you know that I have 3 rules for argument. They are define your terms, state your claim, and use real evidence. And okay, there is technically a 4th one. You are not the first, but this comes into play a lot less in a test situation like the AP exam. If you're writing an argument for class or in life or whatever, understanding that you are not the first person to talk about the thing that you were talking about is important. But for the AP exam, we can just focus on those 3. Define your terms, state your claim, and use real evidence. So I want to spend a moment on each one of those rules. You can go check out my other series on argument if you want more in depth. But I want to talk about specifically how those rules apply to the AP exam that you are going to take in May. Define your terms. Now, in general, when you are making an argument, it is very important that you know what you are talking about. And for the most part, you do. The problem is that just because you know what you're talking about doesn't necessarily mean your audience knows what you're talking about. It's this thing called the curse of knowledge. The person reading your essay is not blessed and gifted with all the things that are in your head. And so if you leave undefined some of the major terms or major things and ideas that you're writing about in this argument essay, you will be in trouble. And for an example, I want to actually put up the 2016 AP exam argument question. This is freely available on the AP website. I'm not breaking any rules here, I promise. But take a look at this. In 1891, Irish author Oscar Wilde observed, "Disobedience, in the eyes of anyone who has read history, is man's original virtue. It is through disobedience that progress has been made, through disobedience and through rebellion." And then you're going to write an essay that argues your position on the extent to which Wilde's claims are valid. His claims are about disobedience and rebellion. And here's the thing. You, as a teenager, have one vision of disobedience in your head. Okay? It's, staying out past your curfew, staying up past your bedtime, doing something else that your parents have said, don't do this thing. But I, as a very, very old adult, I have a different view of disobedience. Rebellion, I think we all kind of understand from a historical context anyway what rebellion is, but disobedience. So it's very important on a prompt like this to take a moment and say, disobedience is this. And in my other series on argument, I talk about different ways that you can define your terms. But just in general, if there is something like this, if there is, this was disobedience in 2017, it was unknown, the value of the unknown. you need to think about how can I define these terms near the beginning so that my AP reader, who's going to be scoring this, understands exactly what it is that I'm talking about. My second rule is state your claim, and this seems obvious because everything you have ever been taught about writing persuasive or argument essays, you have had to have a claim or a thesis statement or a single controlling idea or a main idea or a point or whatever you want to call it. But here's what makes it a little tricky for AP. The AP question is not, here's a statement, do you agree with it or disagree with it? The AP question is not, should we do this thing or should we not do this thing? The questions are much more subtle. Going back to the Oscar Wilde, I'm going to put it up again. Write an essay that argues your position on the extent to which Wilde's claims are valid. It's not whether you agree or disagree per se with Wilde, although it is a little bit. It's Wilde is 100% true or 100% right, Wilde is 50% right, Wilde is 0% right, then with evidence to back it up. You are not advocating disobedience or obedience. You are not advocating rebellion or what's the opposite of rebellion? Sitting around doing nothing. It's here's a claim that has been made and I have to evaluate this claim. So you writing your essay and stating your claim, you can't just simply say, I agree with Oscar Wilde. You can't just simply say, yeah, Oscar Wilde is nuts. No. You have to say something like, given my experience and the observations that I've been able to make about history and culture, I feel Oscar Wilde's claims are pretty valid. Or, given my own history and what I have seen, I don't believe that Oscar Wilde's claims are valid because disobedience and rebellion end up getting people hurt. So you have to be able to think about your claim as more than a simply yes or no. I agree, I disagree. And here is a place where you can seem a little bit more sophisticated as a writer, because you have also been taught, every time you've been taught persuasive writing, argument writing, that your claim has to go at the beginning. That is not true. You can save your claim for the end. You can start with, well, you know, Oscar Wilde says this about disobedience, and let me define disobedience through a bunch of examples and talk about the outcome of those examples. And then your last paragraph, you say, because of all of this, I find that Oscar Wilde's claims are valid or not valid or only partially valid or only valid in circumstances when blah, blah, blah. And you save your claim for the end. That is a sophisticated strategy that AP readers like to see. Putting a thesis statement in your first paragraph is not. Use real evidence. Now this can be tricky on the AP exam because you're in an exam situation. You cannot research. You cannot whip out your smartphone and Google up examples of disobedience in history. You have to rely on the answers that are inside your head, and they need to be real. Those examples and evidence and the logical positions that you want to put together, they have to be true. Because if you are relying only on hypotheticals, like for the disobedience question, you could say, there's this rule right now that I have to live under at my school, and I suggested maybe we do a walkout, and if we did walk out, this is what would happen probably, and then this is what would happen. But when you make up evidence like that, what you are admitting is that there is no evidence, no real evidence that supports your claim. If you make up evidence or if you rely on hypothetical situations, you are basically saying, I have this opinion, but it's baseless. I have nothing that I can back my opinion up with. That's why I teach, and I recommend, and have done it in both of my argument series, ROE, the acronym ROE, Readings, Observations, and Experience. When you are writing the argument question, there is actually enough space on the page where you can draw yourself an ROE chart, and you can start thinking about readings. Readings mostly being stuff you should have learned in school: literature, history, psychology, sociology, economics, science. Observations, things in the culture around you. It could be popular culture, but it could also be current events and news. And then finally, experiences. These are things that have happened to you or have happened to people you know. There can be a temptation to make up experiences. But, oh, come on, people, if you're resorting to inventing things that happen to you in order to write the AP exam, just why are you even? Don't do that. Use real evidence. Okay, those are my 3 rules and how they apply to the AP exam question. But I want to reiterate a couple of things. Number 1, there is no question mark when you look at this exam prompt. It's just going to say, write this. So if you've been taught to look for the question mark and then paraphrase that as your first sentence or something like that, it doesn't work. It fails. Don't go in looking for the question mark. And the second thing is that the last organizational structure you want to use is a 5-paragraph essay with an introduction, reason 1, reason 2, reason 3, conclusion. That is not sophisticated writing. That is not college-level writing. There is no one in the real world who writes 5-paragraph essays. I don't know where the 5-paragraph essay started. I don't know why middle school teachers and high school teachers are teaching it. It is awful. It is terrible. If you end up writing 5 paragraphs, that's okay, just as long as you aren't following some sort of rigid, defined structure. You should really be basing your structure on what the question is, what your claim about the question is, and where you're getting your evidence. Now, in terms of timing, I haven't talked yet, because I'm talking about argument first, even though it's question 3. I haven't really talked about how to use the writing time. You have 2 hours and 15 minutes. For a while, there was a rule that the first 15 minutes you couldn't open your answer booklet, but now you can open your answer booklet and your test booklet at the same time and have all 2 hours and 15 minutes if you want, just to keep your pen flowing for that entire amount of time. Don't do that. Somewhere in the first 15 minutes, you need to flip to the argument question, you need to look at it, and you need to let it sit in the back of your mind until you actually come around to writing it. So 1 minute. And then when you are writing, you should take about 35 minutes. Once again, all the answers are here. This is not one where you need to carefully read a source or carefully analyze the source. This is one where you are just pulling stuff out of your brain. So take 5 to 10 minutes to plan. You make that row chart. You sketch out a brief outline. You try out a couple of different claims to see which one sounds strongest. Then you want 15 to 20 minutes to write, because you've got to get all of that information out on the page. The number 1 reason why my students end up not passing the AP exam isn't because they're stupid or they didn't study, although sometimes that's true. It's because they didn't finish an essay. Usually it's question 3. I only had time to write the first paragraph. I didn't have enough time to even start question 3. I was tired, I put my head down. You need to make sure that you have that 15 to 20 minutes to dribble out onto the page a coherent argument that is going to score well. And then finally, you want about 5 minutes at the end to proofread, go back through. When my students start the AP class, they are so afraid of crossing out mistakes and writing over or around or above them. But in fact, AP readers tell me that they like to see this because it means that the students are thinking about their work. They're sort of actively treating their document as a living document and going back to make changes as they have better ideas. So go back to proofread, and it isn't just about making sure your periods and commas are in the right place, you've capitalized things right, you've spelled things right. You can have a few of those errors and still be a top half essay. It's about making sure that your ideas are clear and you're not suffering from that curse of knowledge where everything you want to say is here, but it is not clearly on the page. Anyway, next time we will talk about the analysis essay. I'll see you for the next one. I actually think you should do this one in 35 minutes again, because all the answers are here. Do that one more time.